What's up, guys? Let's talk about my favorite books from 2024. We have clearly not finished the year yet, but pretty much most of the reading plans I have for the rest of this year involve rereading books that I've already read. So I don't feel like having to tread through that or include that in this list. I think there's probably one or two new books that I will read, but I'll probably just tie those into my favorite books for 2025 since I probably won't finish them until then anyways. Let's dive into this top 10 and see what we have in common. Hmm. Very interesting. While this is not going in any particular order, let's start off with The Sword of Kaigen by M.O. Wong. This is truly one of the most emotionally impactful books on my life so far, and I cannot recommend this book enough. This book is action-packed, filled with some incredible moments, some heart-wrenching moments, and some just truly devastating experiences. I could not recommend it enough for those of you who like to go through those sort of things in their books. I think this story asks a ton of really important questions that we all should look at when it comes to thinking about our roles in this world, the impact we have on others, as well as the agency we see for ourselves in our own lives. I feel like I see the world differently after reading this book, and those are my favorite kind of books to experience. And if you like that, this is definitely the book for you. After that, we got to go with The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This book is truly the most interesting book I've ever read from a narrative perspective standpoint, from a plot standpoint, from a character development standpoint. I feel like it takes so many things we love about books and flips it on its head in a way that makes you love books even more. This story follows two soldiers who are tasked with taking a god essentially across this land while being chased by these armies, and it's pretty insane, and they go through a lot together. The story has so much for a reader to love, whether that be action-packed sequences, really complex plots, romance, romantic tension, really cool power systems, really interesting approaches to narrative perspective. There's just so much. This is the book of so much. That's how I describe it to people, but in all the best ways. So I highly recommend reading this if you have not, because I am so thankful that I read this book. The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Now, this story really kicked off a thematic adventure for me across my life outside of reading. This book is an incredible Nordic, Viking mythology type fantasy that follows several characters as they navigate a warring land, and also the revival of dead gods and these magical creatures that are incredibly deadly, and a whole species of people who are enslaved. There's just so much happening, but it's happening in this Viking Nordic style, which I am always so intrigued by. I went from reading this book to watching The Last Kingdom on Netflix, and I just feel like my whole year was just Viking themed, as that culture, those stories, that mythology is just so very interesting to me. And this book really nails the depth at which it dives you into that kind of story. So if that's something that you're interested in, this will definitely be a good read for you. If you are looking for an extended series, this does have a sequel, and the third book I think comes out next month, and I'm super excited for that one. And this cover is just immaculate. Look at that giant dragon. The dragon like wraps away all the way to the back here. Just insane. 4, 5, and 6 have to go to the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown, but specifically the last 3 books in the series, Iron Gold, Dark Age, and Lightbringer. This is actually the 3 books that I started my year off with, and when I tell you that is the craziest way to start your year, it is the craziest way to start your year. Iron Gold expands the story at a galactic level. Like, I feel like the first trilogy, you're kind of on 1 or 2 planets. Iron Gold, you just span the entire universe, it feels like. And all these new characters are introduced. All this new political intrigue is brought to the table. There's so much depth beyond just the initial story that we were told. And it brings so many questions to the table. And then the other 2 books just dive you deeper and deeper. Dark Age is one of the most sinister, destructive psyche books I've ever read. Like, it really was insane. I cannot stress enough how crazy that book is. in the best of ways and in the worst of ways. It's incredibly violent, but if you're into that kind of thing, it is definitely the book for you as far as action-packed intergalactic warfare on a destruction level that is planetary. I don't know what else to tell you besides buckle up. Once you finish Dark Age and get into Lightbringer, your heart is going to be torn out of your chest. It is by far the most erratic emotional roller coaster I've ever been on. The amount that I found myself caring about these characters is beyond belief. I had to remind myself that these are fake people that don't exist, and I should not be this emotionally invested in what's happening to them, but you just can't help yourself because the book is just that good. So bravo to Pierce Brown for that. Super excited for Red God that comes out, I don't know, eventually, but it is a story that you want to get caught up on before the last book for sure. 7 and 8 have to go to the first two books in the first Law Trilogy. The first book being The Blade itself, the second book being Before They Are Hanged, and these books are by Joe Abercrombie. This is the prototypical pillar foundational old man fantasy. This book is so purely old man fantasy, and I love it so much. We have some incredibly flawed characters who admittedly spend a ton of time doing a whole bunch of nothing except being upset and grumpy towards each other, and it is just such a comical and philosophical and maybe not so action-packed, but when the action does happen, it just feels so important and you feel like you really earned it once it happens in this book, and you just feel like these characters are real people, not in the sense that they're like not fictional, but that they have real human motives and flaws and depravities, and just they just make a lot of sense. Like, you don't walk out of the story feeling like you don't really know these characters. If you know anything about the world in this book, it's that you know these people and what makes them tick, and it takes a really special type of author to put that on paper. There's a ton of different characters that I do not have the time to get into the depths of like what they've got going on, but if you have not read the first Law Trilogy, you need to get to it ASAP. At 9, we have The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I actually read this very recently. I cannot believe it took me so long to get to this book. It really changed the way that I looked at writing, but it also really changed the lens at which I looked at this world we live in. As a literary project, this book feels like an epiphany. It just feels like it explains so much about not only the world that Octavia lived in the 90s, but the world that we live in today. It's actually a book that was written in the 90s about what the world would look like today, and it is eerily spot on. It's not spot on, like, I won't pretend that we live in this kind of world, but it does not feel far enough away from the experiences that could be just down the road for us, and it really makes you think about how we got here and what we can do to make things change. The story does have a dystopian nature to it. It is very sad through a lot of different portions of this book, as it does outline the world that this story takes place in, but this story is also driven by hope and the random acts of kindness from strangers and the importance of community. These things that I do believe are pillars to human society. I think Octavia really outlines them in a way that shows that all hope is not lost. And so this book, beautifully written, eerily close to what we got going on today, and I highly recommend people read it. It's really impacted me in a way that few books have in my lifetime, so definitely think that everyone should give this a shot. And in 10th place, I have to go with Thomas Weaver's Artificial Wisdom. This book really changed the thriller genre for me. This book is like a techno thriller, sci-fi, murder mystery. There's a lot you can use to describe this book, and it probably is still not enough, but I cannot tell you how impressed I was with this book. As a debut novel, it is so incredibly impressive, but I would not be surprised after reading that story if someone were to tell me that Tom had been writing books for 50 years. I was like, this is just the type of writer that he is, because the story is so well done, the pacing is impeccable, the depth of the world building while still remaining grounded in a reality that seems very similar to ours. And not so far in the near future, we have the stakes of a story that fit into the mold of something that all of us could see happening, and that makes it even scarier. We're following this journalist who is trying to discover what really happened to his wife, who seemingly died in a climate disaster. And then we're also following him as he's trying to solve a murder mystery and also trying to figure out what's going on in this election where they're trying to elect this artificial intelligence. And the story just layers and layers and layers itself, and things intertwine and interweave, and so much is happening, and you're trying to keep up and you want to keep up, and you just get so enthralled in it. As you peel back every layer, you just have more questions, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I got to the end of the story and I was like, I need 200 more pages of this ASAP. I had the joy of actually getting to interview Tom this year and learn more not only about his background and the influences of the story, but really just his writing process and what went into making this book. So that made it even more special to me, and that's why it caps off this list as one of the top 10 books I read in 2024. That's the list. I had a lot of other really good reads this year, and I'm sad that I didn't get to mention them in this video, but it probably would have been like an hour long. And I will maybe have to do next 10 books from 2024. It was truly a great year for reading. I am so excited for next year's reading list, and I am so thankful that I got to share these books with you guys. So many of you guys recommended these books to me. I may have never even heard of half of these books if it weren't for y'all. So thank you so much to those who have given me book recommendations. Shout out to all these authors for writing some incredible works. If you guys have not read these books, please, please, please check them out. They are also for sale in my Amazon storefront, which is linked in my bio. And if you guys have any recommendations, I am already loading up on books for 2025, so please throw them in the comments, and I would be happy to hear what you guys are reading. And let me know what your top 10 books of 2024 were. I would be happy to see them. And if I see anything I haven't read yet, then I definitely need to add it to my TBR. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys next week.